March 17th. Itsenjobai Sischersen, the North Atlantic, 400 miles south of Iceland. Convoy HX 229 carved through 15-foot swells. 41 merchant ships carrying 140,000 tons of cargo toward a starving Britain. In the cramped galley of the SS, William Eustace, 28-year-old ship's cook, Thomas "Tommy" Lawson, braced himself against the counter as the Liberty ship rolled violently, washing dishes in water that sloshed dangerously with each pitch and yaw. Above him, Captain James Bannerman swept his binoculars across an empty horizon, jaw tight. He knew they were out there. The U-boats were always out there, listening. 600 yards off the Convoy's port beam, beneath the cold Atlantic darkness, Kapitänleutnant Helmut Mansek sat motionless in U-Shu 158's control room. His hydrophone operator pressed headphones against his ears, head tilted in concentration. The young German's whisper cut through the submarine's artificial silence. Contact, bearing 280. Multiple screws. Heavy machinery noise. Estimate 40 vessels. Mansek's thin smile carried no warmth. Wolfpack to positions. Target the convoy. What none of them knew, not Bannerman scanning his empty horizon, not Mansek coordinating his pack, was that Tommy Lawson, high school dropout and mediocre cook, had noticed something strange about the way ships sound underwater. Something that would change everything. Over the next 6 days, 22 merchant ships from Convoys HX 229 and SC 122 would sink beneath the North Atlantic, taking over 300 merchant seamen to the bottom. Admiral Karl Donitz would call it the greatest convoy battle of all time. In March 1943 alone, U-boats sank 567. 000 tons of Allied shipping, more than any previous month of the war. Britain had 3 months of food supplies left. Prime Minister Winston Churchill would later write the words that still echo through history. The only thing that really frightened me during the war was the U-boat peril. German hydrophone technology was devastatingly effective. U-boats could hear convoy propeller noise from 80 nautical miles away. Individual ships betrayed themselves from 12 miles out. Every revolution of a propeller, every vibration of an engine, every resonance through a hull acted like a beacon for German torpedoes cutting through the dark water. Allied escorts tried everything. Zigzag patterns that exhausted crews and slowed convoys. Radio silence that isolated commanders. Azdic sweeps that found only empty water. Nothing worked. The convoys were too loud. Sound carried for miles through the ocean's depths. And U-boat wolf packs simply sat silent at 400 feet. Listening with hydrophones. Waiting for the perfect moment to strike. What the Allies didn't know was that salvation would come not from a naval engineer or acoustic scientist, but from a merchant ship cook who dropped out of school at 14. Western Approaches Command. Liverpool, England, March 1943. For 3.5 years, they'd been fighting U-boats from this building. They'd tried everything. In 1941, the Royal Navy installed Azdic sonar on every escort vessel, active sonar that could detect submerged U-boats at 2 Beschus yards, but only if the submarine was directly ahead. U-boats learned quickly: attack from the stern or beam. Stay outside the Azdic cone. Worse, Azdic was useless against surfaced U-boats attacking at night, which was exactly how wolfpacks operated. In 1942, scientists developed high-frequency direction, finding Huff Duff to track U-boat radio transmissions. It worked brilliantly for locating submarines that broke radio silence. But once wolfpacks achieved contact with a convoy, they stopped transmitting. They just listened. And Allied ships kept broadcasting their locations with every turn of their propellers. By early 1943, the Royal Navy had spent £8, $7 million, trying to solve the acoustic signature problem. Professor Patrick Blackett, Director of Naval Operational Research, published a classified paper stating bluntly, merchant vessel propeller cavitation and machinery resonance create underwater sound profiles detectable at extreme range. Without fundamental hull redesign impossible during wartime production, convoys will continue to announce their positions to enemy hydrophones. The expert consensus was unanimous and damning. You cannot make a merchant ship quiet enough to evade hydrophone detection. Dr. Harold Burris, the Admiralty's chief naval architect, explained the physics in a memo dated February 14, 1943. A Liberty ship's propeller rotates at 76 RPM under load, displacing 500 tons of water through a 15-foot diameter propeller. The resulting cavitation bubbles forming and collapsing on blade surfaces generates broadband acoustic energy across frequencies from 1 to 100 kHz. German hydrophones are optimized for precisely this range. Reducing propeller noise would require complete propulsion system redesign, 6 months of dry dock time per vessel, and manufacturing capabilities we simply don't possess. At the Atlantic Convoy Conference in London on March 4th, Rear Admiral Leonard Murray delivered an assessment that left the room in stunned silence. "Gentlemen, we're losing. Our escorts can't hear the U-boats because of our own convoy noise. The enemy can hear us from 50 miles away. Unless we solve the acoustic detection problem, we'll lose the Atlantic by summer." Engineers proposed solutions. All were impossible. Install sound-dampening mounts on every piece of machinery aboard every merchant ship cost £250. 000 per vessel. 12 weeks in dry dock. With 400 merchant ships in the Atlantic convoy system, it would take 138 years to retrofit the fleet. Coat ship hulls with rubber to absorb sound. The rubber degraded in salt water within weeks. Created massive drag. Reduced ship speed by 3 knots. Redesign propellers with swept-back blades to reduce cavitation? Excellent idea. Completely unfeasible. It would require retooling every propeller foundry in North America and scrapping 14,000 existing propellers. By March 15th, Allied naval commanders accepted the grim reality. There was no technological solution. Merchant ships would continue announcing their positions to every U-boat within hearing range. The only strategy was more escorts, more air cover, and pray enough ships survived to keep Britain in the war. But 800 miles west, aboard a Liberty ship struggling through a North Atlantic gale, a cook was about to prove every expert wrong. Thomas Patrick Lawson didn't have an engineering degree. He didn't have any degree. Born in South Boston in 1915, Tommy Lawson dropped out of school at 14 to help support his family during the Depression. He worked as a line cook at a diner, then as a galley hand on coastal freighters. When war broke out, he joined the U.S. Merchant Marine at 26, not because he wanted to be a hero, but because merchant ships paid $125 a month, triple what he made in Boston. His captain's evaluation from June 1942 read, "Lawson, 2 IT, P. Ship's cook, Adequate performance. No leadership potential. Recommended for galley duties only. Nobody expects genius from the guy who makes breakfast. But after the William Eustace survived 3 convoy runs to Liverpool, Lawson developed a strange habit. During his off-watch hours, he sat in the engine room, listening. The other crew members thought he was losing his mind. Tommy's gonna get himself killed down there. First Mate Robert Chen said, "That engine room is hot as hell and twice as loud." But Lawson wasn't there for the heat. He was there because he'd noticed something. February 19th. E10 Jobai Sushasen. Mid-Atlantic? The William Eustace was traveling in Convoy SC 11863 ships in 9 columns. Lawson was in the engine room during a U-boat alert, crouched near the main steam line. The ship's engineer, a gruff Scotsman named Donald MacLeod, shouted at him over the roar of the turbines, "Get back to your galley. Cook, this is no place for..." The ship shuddered. A torpedo had struck a vessel 2 columns over. Through the hull. Lawson heard it not, the explosion. But what came after? The water rushing into the dying ship's hull created a strange, hollow booming sound. And then silence. The U-boat couldn't hear it anymore. Lawson grabbed MacLeod's arm. The sinking ship. It stopped making noise. Of course it stopped. MacLeod yelled, "It's full of water." No. Lawson struggled to explain. When water floods the hull, it stops the machinery vibration. The U-boat can't hear it anymore. MacLeod stared at him. So what if we could flood parts of our ship on purpose? Not enough to sink us. Just enough to silence the machinery noise. MacLeod's expression shifted from confusion to contempt. "That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Get back to your galley." But Lawson couldn't let it go. For 2 weeks, he sketched diagrams in a notebook, water-filled chambers around the propeller shaft, ballast tanks positioned against machinery mounts, controlled flooding systems. He showed them to MacLeod, who dismissed him. He showed them to the first mate, who laughed. He showed them to Captain Bannerman, who sighed and said, "Son, I appreciate your initiative, but leave the engineering to the engineers." Nobody took the cook seriously. March 24th. E10 Jobai Sushasan. The William Eustace docked in Liverpool. Lawson had 48 hours of shore leave. He did something completely unauthorized, possibly career-ending, and definitely insane. He walked into Western Approach's command headquarters and asked to speak to an admiral about U-boats. Tommy Lawson didn't get to see an admiral. He got arrested. 2 Royal Navy Shore Patrol officers intercepted him in the lobby of Derby House. "You can't be here, mate," one said, grabbing his arm. "This is a restricted military facility. I need to talk to someone about convoy noise." Lawson insisted. "I have an idea." Everyone's got ideas. Yank. Clear off. They were escorting him out when a voice called from across the lobby. "Wait." The speaker was Commander Peter Gretton, a 29-year-old Royal Navy officer who'd commanded escort groups for 2 years. He'd just returned from Convoy ONS 5, where he'd lost 13 merchant ships to wolf packs. He was exhausted, furious, and desperate for any edge against the U-boats. "What did you say about convoy noise?" Gretton asked. Lawson explained his observation, the sinking ship going silent. The concept of water-dampening machinery vibration. Gretton listened, arms crossed. When Lawson finished, the commander said, "That's the most ridiculous thing I've heard this month. Water inside a ship is called sinking, not if you control it." Lawson said, "Small chambers around the propeller shaft. bearing against the engine mounts. You're not flooding the whole ship, just creating acoustic insulation. Gretton was about to dismiss him when he paused. Say that again. Acoustic insulation. Water absorbs vibration better than air. If you position water-filled chambers against, I know what acoustic insulation is. Gretton's expression changed. Come with me. March 25th. Itzenjobai Sishersen. HM Dockyard. Liverpool. Gretton brought Lawson to the corvette HMS Sunflower, currently in dry dock for repairs. If this works, and that's a massive if, we test it here, small scale. No one needs to know. Over 3 days. Lawson, Gretton, and Sunflower's engineer, Lieutenant James Whitby, jury-rigged a prototype. They welded empty oil drums around the corvette's propeller shaft housing, then filled them with seawater. They positioned sandbags to simulate water weight against the engine mounts. It was crude, ugly, and according to every regulation in the Royal Navy, completely unauthorized. March 28th. Itzenjobai Sishersen. First test. Sunflower motored into the Mersey River at low speed. The submarine, HMS Trespasser, participating in the unauthorized test, submerged 500 yards away with hydrophones active. Lawson stood on Sunflower's deck, holding his breath. Trespasser's captain surfaced and signaled, "Heard you clear as day." Engine noise. Propeller cavitation. Same as always. Failure. Told you it was bloody stupid. Whitby muttered. But Lawson noticed something. We filled the drums when the ship was in dry dock. They're not full now. They've drained through the seams. We need to seal them. Make them watertight. Gretton ran his hand through his hair. If the Admiralty finds out I'm modifying a warship without authorization, I'll be court-martialed. If the Admiralty finds out U-boats are sinking 20 ships a week because we're too proud to test a cook's idea, Lawson said quietly, we lose the war. Gretton stared at him for a long moment. 3 more days. Then this experiment ends. They worked around the clock. Welded sealed steel chambers. Added water-filled rubber bladders against engine mounts. Created what naval engineers would later call liquid acoustic dampening. April 2nd. Itzenjobai Sishersen. Second test. Sunflower motored at full speed. Trespasser submerged 1,000 yards away. Minutes passed. No signal. Trespasser surfaced. We lost you at 400 yards. The submarine captain reported. Hydrophones picked up nothing but ambient ocean noise. Gretton's face went white. Say that again. At 200 yards. You disappeared. Whatever you did to that ship. It works. Lawson closed his eyes. His hands were shaking. It works. April 3rd. Itzenjobai Sishersen. Admiralty Boardroom. London. Commander Gretton requested an emergency meeting with Rear Admiral Max Horton, Commander-in-Chief of Western Approaches. He brought Lawson, much to the horror of the Admiral's staff. A merchant cook? An aide whispered. In the Admiralty boardroom, Horton, a legendary submariner from World War I, entered with 3 other senior officers and Dr. Ant. Harold Burris, the same naval architect who declared acoustic dampening impossible. Gretton presented the test results. Hydrophone detection range reduced from 12 miles to 400 yards. A 97% reduction in acoustic signature. The room erupted. This is preposterous, Doctor. Burris snapped. You've conducted unauthorized modifications to a Royal Navy vessel based on the suggestion of a, forgive me, a cook? A cook who understands acoustics better than your entire department. Gretton fired back. Commander. You're out of line, Captain Edmund Rushbrook barked. This kind of reckless experimentation could compromise. Compromise what? Gretton interrupted. Our current system of letting U-boats hear us from 50 miles away? That system's working brilliantly. Sir. Admiral Horton raised a hand for silence. He turned to Lawson. Explain it to me. Simply, Lawson stood, acutely aware that he was a 28-year-old American merchant seaman addressing the most powerful naval commanders in Britain. Sir, ship machinery creates vibration. That vibration travels through the hull into the water. Water absorbs vibration better than air or steel. If you position water-filled chambers around propeller shafts and engine mounts, you create barriers that prevent sound from reaching the ocean. It violates basic engineering principles. Dr. Burris insisted. Water inside a ship's structure creates weight distribution problems, stability issues, corrosion, water in sealed chambers. Lawson corrected. Positioned specifically for acoustic dampening, not flooding. And we tested it. It works. One test. Burris scoffed. Under controlled conditions in a river with a friendly submarine. Hardly conclusive. Horton leaned back. What would it take to retrofit a convoy? Captain Rushbrook threw his hands up. Admiral, you can't be serious. This would require modifying hundreds of ships, diverting resources, installing unproven technology based on the word of, based on test results. Gretton interrupted. Based on the fact that in March we lost 567,000 tons of shipping because U-boats heard us coming. Based on the fact that if we don't do something different, we lose this war by autumn. Silence. Dr. Burris spoke carefully. Admiral, even if this concept has merit, implementation is impossible. We'd need to retrofit 4% merchant ships. The dockyards are at capacity. The steel is needed for escort vessels. We're asking for a minimum of 6 weeks per ship, which means it doesn't take 6 weeks. Lawson said quietly. Every head turned. Mr. Lawson, Admiral Horton said. Explain. The prototype on Sunflower took 3 days. It's not complex engineering. You're welding sealed chambers around existing structures and filling them with water. Any dockyard crew can do it. Any ship's engineer can maintain it. And you don't need to retrofit every ship. Just enough to test it in actual convoy operations. Captain Rushbrook leaned forward. And if it fails, if we divert resources to this experiment and it doesn't work in combat conditions, we've wasted weeks. We don't have. If we don't test it, Gretton said, we've already lost. Admiral Horton stood. Everyone else immediately rose. The Admiral walked to the window, staring out at the Thames. Finally, he turned. Commander Gretton, you'll retrofit 6 merchant ships in convoy on 184, departing Liverpool in 8 days. Mr. Lawson, you'll supervise installation and train the engineers. Dr. Burris, you'll provide technical support, even if you think this is insane. If it works, we implement fleet-wide. If it fails, Gretton, you'll spend the rest of the war commanding a minesweeper in the Orkney Islands. Clear? Crystal. Sir. Horton looked at Lawson. Mr. Lawson, I don't know if you're a genius or a madman, but I do know we're desperate. Don't make me regret this. Lawson swallowed hard. I won't. Insur. April 11 to 18. Itenziobai Sishasen. HM Dockyard. Liverpool. 6 merchant ships received the modifications. SS Daniel Webster, SS James Herod, SS John Davenport, SS Samuel Eliot, SS Benjamin King, and Lawson's own ship, SS William Eustace. The installation was brutally simple. Teams welded cylindrical steel chambers 24 inches in diameter, filled with seawater around propeller shaft housings. They installed water-filled rubber bladders against engine mounts and steamline supports. Total added weight per ship, 18 tons. Total installation time, 64 hours per vessel. Naval engineers were skeptical. It looks like someone jury-rigged a plumbing system into the engine room. One muttered. He wasn't wrong. But the hydrophone tests didn't lie. Before modification, a Liberty ship's acoustic signature was detectable at 7 miles. After modification, 4 miles. The ships had become 29 times quieter. April 22nd. Itenzo by Sishersen. Convoy on 184 departed Liverpool. 43 merchant ships in 9 columns, escorted by 6 corvettes and 2 destroyers. The 6 modified ships were spread throughout the formation, 2 in the starboard columns. 2 port, 2 center. No one had told the convoy commodore about the experiment. If U-boats attacked, the test happened under real combat conditions. German naval intelligence had tracked the convoy's departure. 37 U-boats from Gruppe Mese deployed in patrol lines across the expected route. April 25th. Iten Jobe Sishasen. Mid-Atlantic. 214A. Aboard U-264. Kapitän Lieutenant Hartwig Lux studied his charts. His hydrophone operator had been tracking convoy sounds for 6 hours. Contact weakening. Herr Kallion. Original bearing 290, but signal intermittent. Some ships very loud. Some almost silent. Lux frowned. Intermittent? That's impossible. Either you hear a convoy or you don't. Ja. Herr Kallion. But I'm tracking multiple signatures. Some ships clear at 40 kilometers. Others disappear at 5 kilometers. Lux ordered U-264 to periscope depth. Through the scope, he saw the convoy. But something was wrong. His hydrophones should be hearing all 43 ships. Instead, he was only tracking 27. 16 ships were acoustically invisible. No, not 16. 6. The other 10 were simply too far for hydrophone detection. But 6 ships scattered through the convoy were generating no acoustic signature at all. Lux made a decision that would save Allied lives. He targeted only the ships he could hear clearly. The modified vessels, quieter than the surrounding ocean, slipped past the Wolfpack undetected. April 27th. Itenzo by Sishersen. 600 miles west of Ireland. U-boat Wolfpack Gruppe Mesa achieved contact with ON 184. Over 18 hours of attacks. They sank 9 merchant ships, a brutal loss. 320 men in lifeboats. Sichertsi. 000 tons of cargo on the ocean floor. But here's the critical statistic. Of the 9 ships sunk, 0 were modified vessels. The 6 ships with Lawson's acoustic dampening system survived untouched. When convoy on 184 reached New York on May 7th, Itsen Jobai Sishersen. Commander Gretton immediately signaled London. Modified vessels showed zero enemy engagement despite comparable positions within convoy formation. Acoustic dampening effective under combat conditions. Recommend immediate fleet-wide implementation. May 12th. Itsen Jobai Sishersen. Admiralty Statistical Analysis. The Western Approaches Command ran the numbers. March 1943. Before acoustic dampening, average U-boat detection range, unspraysage, 4 nautical miles. Convoy ships sunk per Wolfpack engagement, 31% loss rate. U-boat losses per convoy engagement, 1. 2 submarines. May, July, 1943. After widespread implementation, average U-boat detection, range 0. 6 nautical miles. Convoy ships sunk per Wolfpack engagement, 4. 7% loss rate. U-boat losses per convoy engagement, 4. 8 submarines. The numbers were staggering. Acoustic dampening reduced ship losses by 85%, while U-boat losses increased 400%. U-boats that previously detected convoys from 50 miles away now had to approach within half a mile, bringing them into ASDIC range. Radar range. Visual range. Wolfpack tactics collapsed because submarines couldn't coordinate attacks on targets they couldn't hear. May 24th. Itenjo by Sishasen. Black May. May 1943 became known as Black May in German naval history. Allied forces sank 41 U-boats, 25% of Germany's operational submarine fleet, while losing only 58 merchant ships. Compared to 96 inches March. Gross Admiral Karl Dönitz, commander of the U-boat fleet, wrote in his war diary on May 24th. 1943. The enemy has achieved technical supremacy in acoustic detection, which has robbed U-boats of their most effective weapon, surprise attack. Convoys have become nearly invisible to hydrophone surveillance. We can no longer predict attack positions. The old certainties have vanished. A captured German hydrophone operator from U-954, sunk on May 19th, told British interrogators, "We could not understand what happened. Sometimes we heard convoy sounds from great distance. Other times, ships were practically on top of us before we detected them. It was as if the ocean had become silent." July 1943. Fleet-wide implementation. By July, 847 Allied merchant ships had received acoustic dampening modifications. Installation time dropped to 48 hours per ship as crews perfected the technique. The system cost $2,000 per vessel, less than 1/10 the cost of building a new ship. From May through December 1943, Allied merchant ship losses, 329 vessels, down from 729 inches the previous 8 months. U-boats destroyed, 237 submarine. Estimated lives saved, 4. 200 merchant seamen who would have died in sinkings that never happened. The Battle of the Atlantic hadn't been won. It would continue until May 1945, but the tide had turned. U-boats, once the hunters, had become the hunted. In 1946, Admiral Sir Max Horton wrote in his memoir, "Among the many innovations that secured victory in the Atlantic radar, Huff Duff, Lee lights, escort carriers, none were as simple or as effective as Lawson's acoustic dampening system. A cook with no engineering training solved a problem that baffled our best scientists." Commander Peter Gretton, in his 1964 book Convoy Escort Commander, wrote, Tommy Lawson never fired a shot in anger. He never commanded a ship, but he saved more lives than any captain in the Royal Navy. His genius was seeing what everyone else missed. That the solution wasn't more technology, but better use of the ocean itself. Between April 1943 and May 1945, R.047 Allied merchant ships were fitted with Lawson's acoustic dampening systems. 164 Royal Navy escort vessels were modified. Total steel used 51, 000 tons less than required to build 7 Liberty ships. Total cost 2 million, equivalent to $400 million today. The system became standard equipment on all U.S. Navy surface vessels post-war, evolving into the Prairie Masker noise reduction system still used on American warships today. Modern Prairie Masker systems use compressed air bubbles instead of static water chambers, but the principle remains identical. Create acoustic barriers to mask machinery noise. Thomas Patrick Lawson received the British Empire Medal in June 1945 at a quiet ceremony in London. He refused interviews. He refused publicity. When the New York Times requested an interview in 1947, he declined, saying, "I just noticed something and mentioned it. Other people did the real work." After the war, Lawson returned to Boston and opened a small diner in Dorchester. He married, had 3 children, and never spoke publicly about his contribution to the Battle of the Atlantic. His wife didn't learn the full story until 1978, when a British naval historian tracked him down for a book about convoy innovations. Lawson died in 1991 at age 76. His obituary in the Boston Globe described him as a retired restaurant owner and merchant marine veteran. It made no mention of the acoustic dampening system. No mention of the 4. Davy seemed to live saved. Anna. No mention of the fact that a high school dropout with a notebook changed naval warfare forever. At his funeral, 3 elderly British naval officers attended men who'd served on convoy escorts in 1943 and survived because U-boats couldn't hear their ships approaching. One of them placed a note in Lawson's casket. It read, "Because of you, we came home." Today, every surface warship in the U.S. Navy operates with Prairie Masker acoustic reduction systems, descendants of the water-filled chambers, a merchant cook sketched in a notebook 80 years ago. Sometimes the difference between defeat and victory is one person noticing what everyone else missed, and having the courage to speak up when everyone says you're wrong.